Protect your energy at all cost.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today we're looking back at the season, the 2018-19 season of the Atlanta Hawks, looking at the play of quite a number of really talented young players, what it means for the future, how this team's cap space projects for the offseason, all that sort of stuff. So, Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. Let's have a look at how this team panned out. 29-53 in Lloyd Pierce's first season in the NBA. A lot of people were expecting them to be close to the worst team in the NBA. They weren't quite there. They ended with the fifth worst record. So it played really well down the stretch. The young players starting to come together. 10.5% chance of getting that number one overall pick, and a pretty significant chance of getting 2 top 10 selections here as well, because they do have Dallas's first round pick coming their way, unless the Mavericks jump up inside the top 4. That pick is top 5 protected. The Mavericks, as things stand at the moment, have the 9th overall pick. So the Hawks could be getting themselves that 9th spot there. Or, if Minnesota, the Lakers, Charlotte, Miami, or Sacramento/Boston jump ahead into the lottery, then that pick gets pushed out. But there is a pretty significant chance that the Hawks do end up with 2 top 10 picks here, a top 5 and a top 10 selection in this upcoming draft. They also have quite a few second round picks as well. They do have a Cavs first round pick that's coming their way. That won't be coming this season. It's protected. It's top 10 protected, and the Cavs are going to get a top 10 pick. It's also top 10 protected next season, so they may not end up actually getting a first round pick there. They do also have their second round selection. They have the Hornets second round selection as well. So they've got their pick at number 35. They've got the Lakers pick at number 41 as well, and then they have that Charlotte pick at number 44. So potentially 5 upcoming draft choices for the Atlanta Hawks heading into this season. In terms of free agents, you've got The Undertaker, Dwayne Dedmon, and Vince Carter, both as unrestricted free agents. You've got Justin Anderson as a restricted free agent on this squad, as well as Isaac Humphries being a restricted free agent. He was signed at the end of last season, but he's a restricted free agent. You've got Jalen Adams and Deontay Davis, both as non-guaranteed players for this upcoming season. Otherwise, everyone else is guaranteed for this coming season. And they have, assuming they renounce the cap hold of Dwayne Dedmon, Justin Anderson, and those other guys, Adams and Davis and Humphries and Carter, they can get $42 million in cap space. Now, they're unlikely to be a player for a big name free agent, but they showed enough with this young core that they could get some players and they could make a significant jump up. They've already got those 2 first round picks coming in this year, most likely 2 top 10 picks. Add to that the play of John Collins, Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, Taurean Prince as well, DeAndre Bembry, and then you do have some room to bring in some free agents. I reckon Dedmon might come back here for another 2-year deal, say 2 years, $14 million, maybe something along those lines, to be a stopgap center for the next couple of seasons. I could see that happening, and it doesn't eat too much into their cap space. Vince Carter says he wants to come back. I think that the Hawks would like to have him back there as well. Justin Anderson, I'm not so sure that they worry about bringing him back as a restricted guy. Same with Davis and Humphries. Well, Jalen Adams, I think they will keep his guarantee on his contract, but they do have quite a bit of flexibility. The reason they have so much flexibility is they had so much dead money from the Carmelo Anthony trade from last season. Took on Melo there and then waived him, so I had $44 million of dead money on the books last season. That all comes off this year, so that opens up a ton of cap space. So they're going to have some opportunities to bring in some players, or to be able to acquire more assets by taking on trades like the Carmelo Anthony trade to get those picks or young players off other teams. So it could be still another rebuilding team, but I wouldn't be stunned if the Hawks did take a large step forward next season, because there is quite a few pieces in place. Young players already there. 2 top 10 picks, cap space, for some veterans, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them improve their win total by 7, 8, 9 wins next season. I wouldn't be completely stunned. I think the playoffs might be pushing it a bit too far, but it's not an outrageous statement now for teams like the Knicks, depending on what Kevin Durant and that does. The Bulls, it's a laughable proposition to think that they're going to be pushing up at that high. Maybe it's not. Bulls fans will definitely disagree with me in that regard. But yeah, I think the Hawks do have quite a bright future here. So let's talk about some of these players who do. Actually, no, we're going to talk a bit more just about the Hawks team and what we need to look at there. They were the fastest paced team in the NBA. 27th on defense, 23rd on offense. Not too bad there, but that pace is important. We saw that with that young team really going hard there. 10th in assists, 11th in steals, 4th in offensive rebounds, 3rd in three-point attempt rate, middle of the pack in terms of percentage. So not terrible sort of stuff. Now, the defense really did struggle. They allowed the most assists against them than any NBA team, and that allowed the most steals against them as well. But that pace was pushed up, taking the three-point shots. It's got the genesis of a modern offense there with someone like Trae Young and Huerter and Collins, these young players who are really prototypical almost. Maybe Collins not quite that prototypical, but guys who can really develop into a strong, fast-paced, quick up-tempo, aggressive, exciting sort of a squad. So let's talk about these guys. Their number one fantasy player this season was the Baptist John Collins. He missed some time at the beginning of the season with an ankle injury, ended up playing in 61 games, just 30 minutes a night, but averaged almost 20 points, 19.5 points, 9.8 rebounds, a 3 a game, 2 assists, 0.4 steals, and 0.6 blocks on 56 and 77%. This is, we pumped him up quite a bit on the podcast. It looked a little bit odd at the start of the season when he was injured, and then when he just could not get a single defensive stat to go his way to begin the year. But looking at that, there is so much more that can improve from Collins here. 19.5 points in 30 minutes. Play him 33 minutes. We're talking 22 points a game, 12 rebounds. He hit a 3 a game at 35%. That can improve. And those steals and block numbers were just so weirdly low. And over the last 14 games of the season, we saw those block numbers rise back up. 1.5 blocks per game, which is getting pretty close to what he was doing last season. He had a blocks per 36 last year of 1.6. and a steals of 0.9. For reference, this season, 0.4 and 0.8. So both of those rates cut in half. But over those last 14 games, the block rate was back up and the steal rate was pushing back up. You keep those numbers going at that level, and then this is a top 25 sort of a player next season. Get those minutes bumped up. The efficiency's fine. Really, really impressive stuff from the Baptist John Collins, and I think he's going to be a really, really impactful fantasy guy. Led this team in PIPM and in wins added. He was a positive force. Now, defensively, he still does have issues, and he's a negative on that end. That's somewhat of a concern moving forward if you're going to play him, especially at the 5. He's played most of his time at the 4, and that's why I think they will bring Dedmon back, keep Collins at the 4 a little bit. He showed he can pass a little bit also, which is an impressive thing for someone like Collins. I think there are big things ahead for Johnny. You're really developing that three-point shot a little bit more, and if you can get anything going defensively, like we saw at the end of the season, because the numbers were way down this year, but if they can come back at all, I think we've got a really, really top-class player who maybe peaks in his 4th or 5th NBA season and then drops off as other talent starts to develop around him, but there are some massive, massive numbers coming for John Collins, I believe. Let's talk about today's sponsor, and that is the great people over at ZipRecruiter. Hiring can be really challenging, hard to find the correct candidates, the right qualifications on those candidates. It takes too long. There can be too many applicants at times, and most of the time those guys aren't even reading the ads that you put out there because they're sending in, and from personal experience. I remember when I used to work as a pharmacist, we'd put out an ad, applying for a pharmacist, and we'd have people applying who were chefs and bakers. And I have no experience, but I worked at a supermarket for 2 years as a cashier. Like, that's not what a pharmacist requires. So it can be frustrating. ZipRecruiter can help eliminate a lot of that frustration. They send your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, but they don't stop just there. With their powerful matching technology, they scan thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invite them to apply for your job. As the applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. It's so effective that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. And right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/lockedon. That's ziprecruiter.com/lockedon, ZipRecruiter.com/lockedon. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, let's go on to the next guy, and that is Trae Young, a player who absolutely exploded at the end of the season. He was 59th ranked overall this year, in large part because during the months of October and November, he couldn't hit a shot at all. That obviously changed December onwards, January onwards, and he was a monster down the stretch. His defensive stuff is a real problem. He is absolutely horrible on that end, and that meant he had a negative PIPM, negative 1.12 overall, because his defensive stuff was just so bad. And he was a neutral on-court player, a plus 0.0, so exactly a neutral guy, whereas a guy like Collins, plus 5.4 in the on-off stuff. But Young, over the second half of the season, he was a top 20 player, averaging 23.5 points with 9 assists, 4.5 rebounds, 2.4 threes and a steal on 44 and 86%, shooting 36% from three. So there's a lot to unpack with what Young did. For the course of the season, in 31 minutes, 19, 4, and 8 with 0.9 steals. So you look at this and it's very, very obvious where Trae Young can get better. Right, so over the last 3 months, 33 minutes, 23.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, 9 assists. Is that topping out? Maybe. Can he get to 26 points per game? Probably. Where does he get better? Well, hitting only 2.5 threes for a guy that can be a much better shooter. He can get that to 3.2 triples, no problem. Dame Lillard, Klay Thompson, Damian Lillard, James Harden type area of three-pointers, mate. He can do that. So that's an extra boost to that category. Shooting 44% from three over the last 28 games. He can get to 45%, I think, over time. 6.5 free throw attempts in a rookie season is, and I don't know why I said free throw as free throw. That was just terrible pronunciation. But 6.5 attempts over those final 28 games as a rookie is remarkable. He can be an 8-9 free throw attempt per game guy at 86%, a huge boost. And where the real swing is going to be is on steals. At 0.9 steals per game, that's not quite there. If he can get it up to 1.2, 1.3, something that's always held Damian Lillard back a bit. And I think the Lillard comparison in terms of fantasy ceiling is not far off from Young. Young's a better passer. Lillard's probably a better scorer. But I think Young can have top 10 seasons. I think that next year he's going to be picked in the second round. And I don't think it'll be a mistake, but there might be a risk of where's the upside there in Trae Young. But I have really pretty high confidence that this guy with already elite assists, elite scoring, elite free throw rate, and free throw attempts, that there is really a ton to like about what he can do. Defensively, it is a real problem, and he does need to get better there. Thankfully, being a poor defender at the point guard position is the least problematic on the court, and that's the position where players can struggle, but it does cause problems. We've seen that with Isaiah Thomas, and once you lose a little bit off the top of your offensive game, then the defensive stuff makes you almost unplayable, and that can be a problem for Young as we move forward. It's not at this point, and as I always say, on a team that's as bad as the Hawks, having someone who struggles defensively, it's not going to really limit his overall production, and just hope that he can grow that defensive side that enables him that when the team becomes good, they don't have to be so worried about him, especially when it comes to playoff stuff. He also was a poor finisher at the rim, so there's room to improve there. He wasn't relying on long twos going in. He had only 35% of those. So it was a lot of room for improvement here for Young, and to me, he is almost a lock top 15 guy in the future and will be a second round guy as early as next season. Just massive, massive stuff from Trae Young after a terribly slow start to the year. The next ranked player, or the next highest ranked player for fantasy, was the Undertaker, Dwayne Dedmon. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with Dedmon. He is an unrestricted free agent. He will be turning 30 in a couple of months. I think he'd like to return to Atlanta. From my understanding, Atlanta would like him back, and I could see that happening. 25 minutes a game, 64 games. He has had some injury problems and some minutes issues, but when he's been healthy and he's had a run at things, we see big numbers. And the 61st ranked player this season, it's hard to complain. 11, 7.5 with a triple one, 49 and 81%. Bring him back and play him 26 minutes a night. Then you got another top 80 type of season there. Now, Alex Len had his moments on this team. He showed some flashes, so if Dedmon's gone, then Len can step into that role. But I think that we get another solid season from Dedmon. Maybe it's the last one next year, but I really like him as a player. I like him as a fantasy contributor. We've seen that over the past couple of years. He was a positive in the on-off stuff. He was a really impactful presence defensively and works well next to John Collins. He was second on this team in PIPM behind Collins, a plus 0.81. The only other player on this team with a positive. It was just Collins and Dedmon, the two guys. Second in wins added as well. And it's important those two guys who led the team in wins added only played 61 and 64 games, the Baptist and the Undertaker. So really strong from him. Again, at this point, I'm thinking that he will be back on this squad. That's far from a guarantee. I think he had 2 years, 14 million with maybe a partial guarantee on that second year. Maybe it's 2 years, 16 million with a partial guarantee on that second year. I think that would be enough to bring Dedmon back and have another 25 to 27 minute season and put up probably not top 60 numbers, but at least top 100 numbers. So really interesting to see what he can do. Now, a guy that absolutely everybody shit on all season was the artist formerly known as Taurean Prince. And I got it wrong with Prince in the offseason. I was expecting him to take on a large load this season.
Giggity!
But it wasn't to be. Now, injuries bothered him quite a lot. He had some personal problems. Not one problems, it was the birth of his child. But only 28 minutes a night, that's the issue that's staring you blankly in the face. 55 games, 28 minutes. Still, he was the 118th ranked player. So it wasn't an absolute complete disaster. It just wasn't what we were expecting, that, especially considering he was the 76th ranked player last season. We hoped for him to take a step forward and maybe push into the top 50. But instead, he regressed pretty hard. But it wasn't due to efficiency, because he saw his true shooting rise from 55 to 58%. He hit his threes at 39% for the second consecutive season. What it was, with the presence of Trae Young, we saw his assist rate drop down. We saw his rebound rate completely disappear, as he didn't play a huge amount at the 4, which he did last season. We saw more from Collins, Len, and Dedmon there as well, taking up those minutes at the 4 and the 5. So the rebound rate fell off a cliff. The assist rate dropped down as well. The usage dropped down with Young there also. And then so for the scoring, and the minutes also dropped down too. So there were a couple of things that weren't ideal for Prince. He was hot and cold. But if you want to have a look at some encouraging signs, look what he did over the month of March and April. There were some positive performances, but it was the fact that the rebounds and assists did drop down is somewhat of a concern. We look at his future projection stuff with Jacob Goldstein's PIPM. It's not painting a rosy picture for what Prince is able to do moving forward. He was, like Trae Young, a neutral in terms of on-off this season. In terms of PIPM, a negative 1.4, not an ideal number there for Prince. You would have to think that he has a chance at a bit of a redemption, but I do worry that with Young, with Huerter, with Collins, with those three guys all locked in, I believe, as starters, the 3 and the 5 become interesting decisions. And this team will have 2 top 10 picks. So if they jump up to pick number 2, to pick number 3, what are they doing in that scenario? Is RJ Barrett coming in? Is Cam Reddish coming in? Is DeAndre Hunter coming in? Will one of those guys take those minutes for Prince? I am really worried about that long term. Prince was a guy I never liked coming in as a rookie. I warmed to him last season. It didn't happen this season, and I'm starting to go out on him again here. So I reckon his run as a top or a standard league top 150 type player maybe has 1 or 2 years left in it, maybe, and then he drops down to a bench level performer. That's the level of concern I do have with Prince. It wasn't the fact that he didn't shoot well, because he didn't have an off-year shooting. He shot well. He shot well from 2. He shot well from 3. He shot pretty well from the rim as well. Defensively, he does have his struggles there. For a guy that looks like he'd be a good defender, he isn't. And then when we saw the passing stuff decrease as well, that's a little bit of a concern. He is more of a dependent sort of a player. Hard for him to create his own shots. Really dependent on other guys getting him the ball as well. There is level for concern with Taurean Prince moving forward. I think you should have more concern for the next guy on my list. And that is Kent Bazemore, who was the 146th ranked player this season. He's got 1 more year left on his contract, which was an overpay at the time. But he's played relatively well on this squad. $19.2 million he's due next season. I don't imagine that he is going to be having any sort of significant role. He played 24.5 minutes this season. That is a bloated number, and that's not the expectation for next season. The reason why it's bloated is that he started the season as the starter, playing 28 minutes a night. He was benched, and then as soon as he was benched, Prince got hurt, so he moved back into the starting lineup. And then at the end of the season, we saw his minutes drop right down around. I expect him to be a 20-21 minute a game guy next season unless he gets traded. The fact is he's just not as good as what some people make him out to be. Offensively, he really struggled. Now, he can be a good defensive player. He can be really solid there. And he can rack up some defensive numbers. But PIPM, he was one of the absolute worst players on the Hawks, and negative 1.94 in that metric, and negative 4.5 on-off is pretty disappointing as well. Not an encouraging number for Bazemore, and his game has really taken a significant step backwards over this season. 11.5 points with 4 rebounds and 2.3 assists, but he keeps himself afloat with 1.3 steals and 0.6 blocks. 40 and 72, not going to cut it for percentages. And if those minutes go from 24 down to 20, then the two things keeping him up, the steals and the blocks, then they come down and he isn't a 12-team league valuable player anymore. And I reckon there's a legitimate chance that Bazemore doesn't even end up in the top 200 next season. The next guy we talk about is DeAndre Bembry, the 170th ranked player. He had a bit of a breakout for him this season, just a negative 0.3 on-off this year. His PIPM stuff wasn't all that impressive, negative 1.46, but he had his moments. Just inconsistency kills him. He's 25 years of age, played all 82 games in 24 minutes, 8.4 points, but it's the 4.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, the steals and the blocks, much like Bazemore. I think Bembry's going to be taking a lot of Bazemore's minutes next season. He shot the 3-ball poorly, 29%, didn't hit his free throws. All that stuff is always going to be a worry with Bembry, whether he can do those things. Yeah, can he ever become a top 100 player? I think that might be pushing it a bit. Can he be a fringe 12-team league guy? It's all going to come down to what his shooting's like. And over the final 16 games of the season, he was at 50 and 74 from the field and from the line, and that pushed him to the 129th best player in only 20 minutes a game. The steals will come, the blocks will come, the assists and the rebounds, that'll all be there. It's all going to depend on, is he hurting you in percentages, or is he being a neutral as to whether he's a 12-team league guy? I don't really envisage him as a future starter or anything along those lines, but at least we saw some positivity out of Bembry, and he was able to stay healthy. And this is another guy that played 38 games in his rookie year, 26 games in his second season, and you can call him injury prone. And then he played 82 games this season, so obviously an injury prone guy becoming an Ironman. That's what these things do. They change pretty rapidly, and Bembry was able to have clearly his best season as an NBA player. The next guy we talk about is a guy that I think is really important to talk about, and that is Fanapants Kevin Huerter, the 171st ranked player this season, still only 20 years of age, 27 minutes a game, almost 10 points, 3 rebounds and 3 assists with 2 threes and 0.9 steals. 42, 73, and 38 for a true shooting of 53%. But it's his advanced numbers which really get me interested. A PIPM of negative 0.3, third on the team in wins added, ahead of Trae Young, ahead of Alex Len, ahead of Kent Bazemore. It goes Collins, Dedmon, and then Huerter. On-off, very impressive, a plus 5.5. He's like a McCall Bridges for the Phoenix Suns, a guy that just makes the team better, and a lot of the time that will end up translating into fantasy stuff. Over the last 2 months of the season, a top 150 player in 28 minutes. I expect that 28 minutes to really surge to 32, 33 next year. We saw an ability for him to handle the ball. 3 assists per game as a shooting guard's pretty good. He averaged, over those last 15 games, 11, 3.5, and 3 with 2 triples and a steal. He can get the rebounds. I think he probably can top out as a 16 to 17 point guy, 2.7 threes, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.2 steals on 46 and 82. With the free throw attempt rate is really poor. He's got to be able to get that up. I know the common thing is to compare him to Klay Thompson. I don't think that's a crazy thing, though. I think he can be a probably overall less high scoring, so not a 22 point per game guy, but an equally efficient scorer who adds assists in, and maybe he can top out as a top 50 guy. Remarkably, Goldstein's projection stuff and future projection things have him as a massive, like in the peak of his career, as a 50% chance of being an all-star and a 30% chance of being an all-NBA player, which is higher than both John Collins and Trae Young, which is absolutely astonishing to me that those advanced numbers and the formulas and models that Goldstein is using is bringing Huerter out that way. But that is really something interesting. I was harping on about him being a guy to hold all season. It probably didn't work out how I wanted to. We saw some of the minutes reduced and he did struggle at times. I think a big step forward is coming either next season or the season after. So you've still got an opportunity to acquire him at a lower price in dynasty leagues, and I absolutely would be doing that. I really think that Huerter Has some defensive problems, no doubt about that. That's got to be worked on, and that's something of a concern. But his ability to pass from the wing, his shooting, he just looks so comfortable as a 20-year-old rookie playing alongside another 20-year-old rookie and a 21-year-old power forward. He was so comfortable out there. Really, really high hopes for him. Alex Len, really strong season from Len. I've been a fan of Len for a while, thinking he's been in a shit situation, which he was because it was Phoenix and been dicked around by bad coaching after bad coaching. He had opportunities this season, 20 minutes a game. 198th ranked player, 11-5 with a block on 49 and 65%. Shot threes as well this year, 1 3 a game. The situation with Len is so dependent on what Dedmon does or what the Hawks do in that position, whether they bring in another center. But if he is the starting center, Alex Len, he is absolutely a standard league player. Still only 26 years of age. If he does lock himself in as the starting center, I can see 2 years here of him being a top 120, top 110 player, maybe higher. The fact that he can be a 1.3 threes, 1.5 blocks sort of a guy is important. Field goal percentage and free throws is a worry for what he can do. But he can be a very, very interesting player. If Dedmon's market is too hot, I can see Len being here on this team, being the starting center. He was impressive in the advanced numbers as well. Would have put together a negative 0.25 PIPM, which is a good number, a plus 1.7 on-off. He played some power forward next to Dedmon as well. He worked okay next to John Collins. So there were definitely some real positives there for Len. They've got him on the books for one more season at $4.2 million. So not a high investment in that position. I think he's a real flyer to be a standard league guy next season. Vince Carter, 262nd over the course of the season. Really impressive stuff from Vince just to be able to be playing at his age. Shot the ball well, 39% from three. He wants to go again. I think he probably should, but he also shouldn't be playing 76 games. The Wizard Amari Spellman had his moments. I'm not convinced that this guy's a starting caliber player. The team was 6.5 points better off with him on the bench versus him starting, so that's somewhat of a concern. And then negative 2.37 PIPM, the absolute worst on this squad as well. He does have some stat accumulation ability, 6-4 with a 3, half a steal, half a block in 18 minutes, so he could be a 1-1 sort of a guy. Efficiency is going to be a worry. He's a Maurice Spates type of a player, meaning I don't think he'll ever become a starting caliber guy. And then you had guys like Deontay Davis, who had some moments in his stint on this squad. Jalen Adams, who I do think showed enough to be at least a rotation guy for one more season. Justin Anderson, I had high hopes for Anderson when he was a rookie and held it a little bit through the time, but he disappointed in his time in Atlanta, and I don't think he'll be back. While they still remarkably have Miles Plumlee on the roster, maybe he comes in and plays some minutes if Dedmon's not back, but they really shouldn't be prioritizing anything out of him. They also had Alex Poitras, who had a few moments, but his NBA future is a little bit cloudy at this stage. But some real upside type guys here. Huerter, the one that you probably don't expect. You got Young and Collins. I wouldn't be stunned if this Hawks team had 2 top 25 players next season. It's not crazy with Collins and Young. With Huerter pushing into the top 80, I think that's a possibility. And then if Dedmon's back, another top 80 guy. They could very easily have 2 or 4 top 80 guys, including 2 top 20 guys. Bazemore on the way down. Len with some intriguing potential as well. And Bembry, holding steady in that backup role, taking some of those minutes away from Kent Bazemore. So that is the Atlanta Hawks, their season in review. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on the Himalaya podcast app, also Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and on Spotify. And you can find me on YouTube. Give me a thumbs up, hit subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball, and check out today's sponsor, ZipRecruiter, at ziprecruiter.com/lockedon. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Taurean Prince.